Good morning. Thank you all for being here. As you all know, we're facing some unprecedented times with regard to the budget, and not only are we facing it locally, but we're facing it as a state and as a nation. And you all know, I think, to a large extent, what's gotten us here. The question is, how do we move forward? One of the things that we've seen across the state, and actually even within our own region, is that institutions are doing a lot of cutting. And it was kind of interesting to me, at least this morning, in listening to the results of the national election in France, that the voters decided to go with a candidate who was offering something beyond just cutting. So they rejected the notion that we can cut our way out of this. And I think to a large extent, we're at the same place. We can't cut our way out of this. But it does mean that we have to do business differently. We have to look at things differently. We have to reorganize or organize differently. We have to look at doing things different ways, more streamlined, perhaps more uniform, more consolidations, perhaps more centralizations. And we have to be open to doing things differently and organizing how we work together, being more collaborative, being more cooperative. We now already know that even if the governor's tax incentive passes, we're still probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 billion in the hole. We know that property taxes and corporate taxes are down from the original projections. And so not only does the state have a structural deficit, but we continue to have a structural deficit. So one of the things I think we're going to absolutely have to do is to look at and continue to get ideas from some of you. I've gotten some really good ideas from a number of you on how we might do some things differently to save some dollars. The other things that we're going to have to do is that we're going to have to move to the next level of advocacy. That is, we're going to have to do a better job of telling our story and telling our story to all level of constituents, both at the funding level, public policy making, and in terms of even our neighbors and friends, about not only what we do, but how we do it and for whom we do it. Part of the message gets a little bit complicated in that we have to do some things that seem, in some cases, to be counterproductive to what we want to do long term, which is to improve student success. But there are some measures that we have to take to consolidate and make ourselves stronger. We have very poor systems in some cases that support all of our students, and we have to purchase those, get those implemented, get those as a part of our foundation so that we can build from there. It is very likely that at the end of the day, in September of this year, we'll have a few fewer students than we currently do. But that may give us an opportunity to build the infrastructure for helping thousands of students the next year and the following years out. Right now, we're one of the few community college systems in the country that does not have an adequate degree audit and education plan program that allows all of our students to have a sense of where they are, what they're doing, what needs to happen. All of you are probably painfully aware that the state is moving towards making it mandatory that ed plans are in place for students. Students can only take a course one time with state funding, and a number of other changes that are being made that are going to significantly impact our students' ability to be successful. We've gotten ourselves into, we being the state, have gotten ourselves into a position that we don't have a lot of options left in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing it, when we're going to do it. We're moving more towards performance-based funding. I think all of you have seen the Student Services Task Force recommendations. Many of you have seen the Little Hoover Commission recommendations. It's pretty clear that the momentum points that are being talked about in both of those reports are at some point going to be the measure for how students move through higher education. And we can do what we always do, which is kind of ignore them and wait for them to be thrust upon us, or we can be proactive and we can begin to build the systems that we need to make sure that our students have the support that they need to be successful. So I think that what it's going to call for is an unprecedented opportunity first, but also the need for us to step up and do some things that we haven't done in the past. And it means that all of us are going to have to make some sacrifices. Not just the managers, not just the classified, not just the faculty, not just the part-time folks, all of us. And so our solutions have got to be solutions that everybody participates in. In the old days, the statement used to be, everybody needs to have some skin in the game. And everybody will need to have some skin in the game. And if everyone does have skin in the game, then we can get through this. And I'm not so concerned about just getting through this. I'm more concerned about us thriving and emerging from this a better organization, a better colleges with better students who are more competitive in this workforce. And I'll close by saying a couple of things. One is, if anybody's paying attention to the new normal, folks, is that we will continue to have a large portion of our population unemployed. We will continue to have a large portion of our population who work part-time or as vendors for themselves. And so our relationship to our students and our community has to have a new normal aspiration as well, and that is, what are the kinds of things do we need to do as a district that helps our students and our community understand what the fundamental questions of the future are? And there are just a couple of them. One is, how do we help people learn how to develop problems before they've become a problem and know how to deal with those? Two, how do we teach people how to manipulate technology that hasn't yet been invented? And then how do we help people understand how to solve problems and work in teams that may exist all over the world? Those are the challenges of the future. Those are the challenges of Coast Community College District. And quite frankly, folks, we cannot do that operating the way that we've operated in the past. We cannot do that with the kind of structural deficits that we've carried for the last few years. And so what do? Every year we kick it down the road another year. We'll deal with it next year. Well, let me tell you just quickly what will happen. If we kick this structural deficit that we have now down the road another year, and the governor's tax incentive fails, we'll be looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of a $14 to $15 million deficit next year. It's unsustainable and it's unacceptable, and we don't have any way to close that gap. So whatever might happen this year in terms of staff reductions, if we don't deal with it this year, the multiplier effect in terms of next year is just totally out of our control. It will be a devastating situation if we don't put solutions towards it this year. So I'm going to sit down and turn this over to Vice Chancellor Dunn to walk you through the specifics, and then we're going to do a question and answer to give you an opportunity to raise questions and give us some suggestions about what we need to do with this. Chancellor.
Okay, well, for those of you who were at the board meeting the other evening, this is largely that same presentation. And if you're thinking to yourselves, well, this is a review, I've seen this many times before, I get it, that's good news, because that's our goal, is to build as wide and deep an understanding of the challenges that we're facing as possible. So the Chancellor and I took the show on the road about a month ago, and things continue to evolve and change, and I'll touch on some of the issues the Chancellor spoke to a moment ago, as well as reviewing the approach we've taken to solving this year's budget problem, looking both at our internal operating deficit, solutions we have to date, the need for a rainy day fund, and I will, to the Chancellor's point, talk about the effect of if the taxes fail and then the rainy day fund becomes a structural problem next year, Any one-time solutions we use this year roll forward and become a part of next year's problem, as well as new expenses that emerge next year. And the numbers get frighteningly large. We will look at a multi-year FTES, reserve structure, schedule, and then lastly, some news looking ahead. We're now early May. The governor is supposed to release his May revise on May 14th. Usually there's some analysis to follow, so I would expect by the third week in May, we'll have a good sense of what that means. But bear in mind, now is the time when we have to lock down the tentative budget and move forward. So I'm not anticipating much news other than a continued softening of revenues that the governor had anticipated and perhaps a slight uptick in the challenge we're facing. But anything big that comes out of the May revise will likely not be reflected in the tentative budget, but rather will be reflected in the final budget, which is developed over the summer and then presented to our governance groups and the board in late summer, in September. We have a two-pronged approach to our budget solution this year. On the left side is the internal operating deficit, which is driven by two factors, reduced revenues and increased expenses. And that number shifted. A couple of months ago, we thought we were in the $7 to $7.5 million range. We're now down in the $5.5 million range. I'll walk through some detail in that regard in the next few minutes. And on the right side is the rainy day fund. And remember that $8.2 million is the estimated loss to Coast if the November tax package does not pass. The community college system as a whole would see a $300 million loss. Our share of that would be about $8.25 million. If you look at the far right-hand side, you'll see we're estimating that we're going to see a revenue loss of about $2.6 million. We have made some adjustment to the expenses we see emerging next year. The PERS contribution, that is the employer contribution to the PERS program, has gone up slightly. The biggest single change, though, is in health benefits. You'll recall that just a month or so ago, we were expecting an increase of about $3 million, and we'd modified that to $2.7 million. In fact, when we met with the Health Benefits Advisory Committee a few weeks ago, we were presented that $2.7 million figure, and we left that meeting thinking that our third-party administrator could knock another few $100,000 off that. In fact, I learned about a week ago that she basically cut that uptick in half. So right now we're only anticipating benefits to go up by about $1.3 million, and that's made a big dent in the size of the problem that we are facing for the coming year. There's a discrete line up there for what we call Admin 9, which is our district-wide accounts. Now we have about $21 million in district-wide spending. That is spending that's not dedicated to any one of the 4 sites. And a few months ago, I thought I might be able to take that down incrementally by $100,000 or so. Last year, you'll recall, we took over $1 million out of our district-wide accounts. And in fact, as the dust has begun to settle, we think that's actually going to go up by about $400,000. But remember, on a $21 million budget, a 1% swing is over $200,000. So I think that's about where it's going to settle for the year. But the bottom line is that the internal operating deficit we're chasing now, rather than being $6.7 or $8 million, is really in the $5.4 million range. So that's the good news as we've continued to refine these figures as we move ahead. Been a lot of questions about health insurance and those costs. On the left side of the screen there, you can see historic figures from 06-07 moving forward. The red bars are the actuals, the blue bars are the budgets. And what you can see there is a slow but steady uptick in cost. Now the blue bars, the projections on the right, represent a refinement of figures that we're looking at as we move forward. So as more data has been gathered, and we've been able to refine our projections moving forward. So right now we're anticipating that in the coming year, our per employee per cost will be about $15,100. And that's down significantly from where we thought we would be back in February. Just some detail on the health benefits program. If you're interested, we can talk about that offline. I won't take this group's time in walking through that. But the net result is we're still looking at about a 3.5% uptick in the cost of benefits in the coming year. Now, in a normal year, where we're seeing COLA and growth, or I should say funded COLA and funded growth, an uptick like that in benefits is something we can deal with. But remember, this year, not only are we not seeing new revenues, we're actually seeing a decline in revenues, which compounds the challenges we face then with any new uptick in planned expenditures. These are solutions to date, and you can see the total target was around $6.2 million, and we're down, and these numbers continue to move. We're down under $1 million now in terms of the remaining target deficit. But a lot of what you see there is one-time in nature. That is, those solutions are one-time, and some of them will expire as soon as 6 months from now in the case of stabilization. I wanted to really emphasize that point. The good news is we've found about $5.7 million in solutions. The bad news is that fully 2/3 of those solutions are of one-time or limited duration. So I want to go back to the point the Chancellor made a few minutes ago. If the taxes fail this year, we'll see that $8.2 million hole open up in our budget. Now, we are planning for this rainy day fund, so that shouldn't interrupt us mid-year, but that will roll forward and become part of an internal operating deficit we'll have to solve in the 13-14 year, as will those one-time solutions. Now, you can add another $4 million to that, plus any new expenses that might emerge, plus any further revenue losses we might experience. So when the Chancellor said we could be facing a problem in the $14 to $15 million range, that was quite reasonable and I think represents a very possible outcome if, in fact, we move forward like this and those taxes fail. Now, there's another comment made about kicking down, the structural deficit down the road. Certainly last year, we made a lot of progress. We took a lot of ongoing spending out of our spending plan. So we did do some heavy lifting last year. But these problems keep emerging, these new expenses and continued revenue losses from the state, which makes our budget planning more and more difficult with each passing year. So this year, for example, even though the size of the deficit isn't as large in absolute terms as it was last year, the range of options we have to choose from continues to narrow. This looks at what I'd call personnel matters we've solved. You're aware the board adopted a resolution. They committed to 3%, as have the CDMA group, ACE, and the managers. Now, this is not a forum to negotiate, and I certainly won't be doing that here, but clearly we're continuing those conversations with the faculty and the classified groups. Although, as I said earlier, we're really at a point now where we need to lock down the tentative budget and move ahead. So I won't get into those discussions. Negotiations are held at the bargaining table. But again, you get a sense of where we are in that regard. You probably can't see that too well from the back, but I do want to take a moment and walk through this. This is what I'm calling our rainy day fund construct, and it's really a compilation of one-time resources and one-time needs that we have. So we're estimating that the district's ending fund balance will be just under $19 million. You've heard me talk about a deficit factor that the state has imposed on us. That's almost $5.5 million for this district. That comes right out of any one-time resources that we have this year. We have election costs and some other issues. So we really need about $9.3 million in one-time resources after we set aside funds for our general reserve. And we've put together a number of solutions there, and without going into too much detail, what that chart tells you is that we will completely exhaust all district fund balance, and in fact, at the bottom of the page, you can see that we'll be looking to the colleges for a contribution of their one-time resources to help us meet our one-time spending obligations, build our rainy day fund, and I include the board election in that as well. But very importantly, we have that in place because you recall this year, we set aside about $3.2 million in fund balance, anticipating that the governor's budget, which was contingent on certain revenue thresholds being achieved, that there would be automatic trigger cuts that would take place. In fact, those revenue thresholds were not met. Those mid-year cuts were imposed on us, and it impacted our district to the tune of about $3.2 million. Now, nobody felt that. Nobody felt that because we had set those funds aside in fund balance. But now, even though we're using those one-time funds now, they are now, that mid-year cut is part of the structural problem we're dealing with as we approach the 12-13 year. Well, it'll be the same approach we're taking with the rainy day fund. If the tax measure fails in November, we will have set aside sufficient one-time money to get through the 12-13 year, but as we approach 13-14, we'll have an internal operating deficit that is at least twice the size of the one we're facing this year, which is why, to put a finer point on what the Chancellor said, we can't push that heavy lifting down the road. This looks graphically at FTES and what has happened here. So you can see on the far left the adopted budget for 11-12. The mid-year cut resulted in about a 1.4% workload reduction, but remember, not only was there was no disruption to our budget, we're still serving the same number of FTES with one-time resources. Now, as we move into the 12-13 year, our base will automatically drop that 1.4%, and this concept of stabilization is a process by which the district will deliberately suppress its enrollment lower by about 5%. Because in code, there is a provision that holds a district fiscally harmless during the first year of decline. So, yes, we would reduce FTES by about 5%. To put it another way, we'd still be serving about 95% of the students that we'd served in the current year. And we heard some very impassioned pleas from the students the other evening at the board about we need classes and don't limit our options. And we don't want to do that. We really don't. But the choice is pretty stark. At this point, the choice we see is really between maximizing those courses or saving jobs. And so we can still offer the students 95% of what they had in prior year, and we believe we can do this and help save some jobs along the way. It's a stark choice, and forgive me for being so blunt, but that's the situation we're facing. So as we move ahead, if the taxes fail in November, then our base will drop to that new level, and you can see that horizontal black line that goes across. I'm just assuming for the next couple of years we'd be held flat by the state. And actually, in the context of what's happened in recent years, holding flat might be optimistic. Now, if the taxes pass, the planned construct is that each branch of higher ed would receive 4% new funding for 3 years beginning in the 13-14 year, and that's what we've modeled on the right-hand side of the screen there. So that budget stabilization process, there's a 6-month window within which we believe we can garner some savings, and then we would move through the balance of the 12-13 year using one-time money. And then, of course, as we move into 13-14, we would have some very significant issues to address. This is simply a quick look at fund balance, and the message there is if you look to the right side of the screen, in 07-08, fund balance was sort of at a high point, and then we began to spend down fund balance. And in the context of several really bad budget years, that's not an unreasonable thing to do. It really is, what you're seeing there is a function of deficit spending. But it has given the district time to make some reasoned and careful decisions about how it reduces its budget. Then you can see an uptick there as we move into 11-12. And there was actually a very unusual thing that happened during the 10-11 year, and that was that there was unfunded, actually restoration funding, but unfunded, unbudgeted growth funding that was given to all districts. So of course, since that wasn't budgeted, it fell to the bottom line, and what you see is an uptick on a one-time basis there in terms of our fund balance. And then on the far right-hand side of the screen in 12-13, we're anticipating that we'll end the year with a balance of about $18.7 million. Now I have a couple of more slides that look at fund balance that compares us to our 10 cohort colleges, multi-college districts around the state, and another one that looks statewide at what's happening with fund balance. So these are the 10 multi-college districts that we compare ourselves to. And you can see that where Coast is there in red, our fund balance was about 15 or 16%, as of June 30th of 11, so that was how we concluded the 10-11 year. And I bring this up because you might be talking to friends or colleagues in some of our neighboring districts. And you can see that both North Orange and Rancho have much larger fund balances, which means they have more one-time money, which means they can buy time. They might not be facing the same sorts of decisions that we're facing this year. And then you can see where we fall in context to the other districts that we compare ourselves to. This is a similar look at fund balance, but we have a 2-year trend there looking statewide. The blue bar looks at 9-10, the red bar looks at the 10-11 year. You can see the average statewide, and I think that was bumped upward by that unbudgeted growth dollars that no district and nor did the system anticipate getting that at the beginning of the 10-11 year. But you can see the average statewide was 16% in 9-10 and about 18% in 10-11. The lowest was 5%, and then one district dipped down to below 3% this past year. The highest, as you can see, way up there, 37%. And then you can see what happened with Coast. So I've said I don't believe we have a really large fund balance. So when I compare Coast to either our 10 cohort colleges or I look at it statewide, we are below average in that respect. And it's deliberate in some regards. We have, over the last few years, chosen to spend down one-time money to help buffer the effects of several really successive bad budget years. But as the Chancellor said, some of these decisions we can defer and some we cannot. This schedule, and I won't go through those details, you've seen it all before, but it simply looks at the budget development from the time the governor releases his January proposal through the time that the board is scheduled to adopt the tentative budget. As I'd said earlier, we're continuing conversations with the bargaining units. The tentative budget is being finalized just about now as we move ahead. Layoff notices, if necessary, are still on that chart, and they're shown about the middle of this coming month. And so we're getting close to having our tentative budget pulled together here. Just a few concluding thoughts. So as April is the biggest tax month for the state, and we went into April about $900 million short in terms of statewide tax collections. April, in and of itself, was about $2 billion below the expected level. So right now, as we're anticipating the release of the May revise, there's about a $3 billion shortfall in state revenues. So as I said, that is really, it's making the decision-making at the state level, we know, that much more difficult. Another risk factor that community colleges are facing is with the wind down of redevelopment agencies. There was an expectation by the state that they'd have another almost $150 million with which they could, and the state would be able to reduce its general fund support to the community colleges by that amount. Now there's some question as to whether those redevelopment agency funds or funds from former redevelopment agencies will in fact materialize. And of course, the fear is that that would be imposed on the colleges as yet another addition to our deficit factor. Of course, lastly then is the jury's still out on the tax measure, and I guess will be until that Tuesday in November. But that's the way we see things unfolding now. There's still a lot of uncertainty and risk as we look ahead. There has been softening in tax collections at the state level. We know that's going to make the decision-making by our legislature that much more difficult, and we need to prepare for that, for the potential of what might unfold here. And I think that's all I have.
But it does mean for a year or so, we're going to have to do some things very differently, and we're going to have to make some sacrifices in directions we wouldn't normally like to make. Let me tell you what you can do if you haven't already started to do it. One of the things that you can start to do is to find out who your representatives are at the state, find out, and we can help give you some of that information in terms of who sits on specific committees. You can write, call, email some of those folks. Some of you have legislators in your districts, in your neighborhoods. You see them in grocery stores, you see them at church or wherever you can begin to have those conversations. We'll develop some talking points for everybody to use to do that. But we're just going to have to advocate for ourselves. I heard Walter Bumpus, the president of American Association of Community Colleges, say a couple weeks ago, talk about the fact that, community colleges to a large extent were like, the Rodney Dangerfield of higher education. Nobody respects us. Everybody has great expectations for us, but nobody respects us. And we don't do a good job of talking about what we do and for whom we do it. We've got to do a better job of that. I'm not trying to at all minimize the cost of education here, but many of you know I've come recently from Texas, but I was originally from the East Coast. We will pay $46 a unit in fees here starting this summer. That's about a third of what the average community college pays in fees across the nation. Now, I understand that that's gone from whatever it was a few years ago to 46. That's a significant increase. But the argument we hear all the time by the public policy makers is that people who attend community colleges don't pay their fair share. They don't pay their cost of education. And we all know that that $46 covers about, what, Andy, a third of probably about 20% of what we actually spend on each student. So we get the $46 and then we make it up, hopefully based on property taxes and the money we get from the state. So what happens when we don't get the money from the state or property taxes? We still have to support that student. And so you can already see where that structural deficit is and continues to be every year. Now, please don't go away saying the chancellor said we ought to double tuition. That's not what I'm saying. I'm simply saying that we've got to find some ways of offsetting those costs. Those costs continue to increase at the same time our budget continues to decrease. And that's why I'm arguing for us, not me, us coming up with some different solutions. Can we organize in different ways? Can we look at doing more interdisciplinary approaches with courses? Can we find different pathways for students? Does everybody have to take the same thing to get to where they need to be? Can we look at more certification of prior learning? Can we do more of the kinds of things that the military is doing in terms of certification? Can we look at more competency-based education? We've got to look at everything. And we simply can't assume that we can continue to do what we've done. Now, here again, don't go around and tell people that I said I don't value what we've done and what we do. That's not what I'm suggesting. I think we have a great history, a great tradition, but we can't rest on that. We have to take it to the next level. What are the things that we can do to be better, to be more streamlined, to be more efficient, to leverage our resources? Got great intellectual resources in this room, folks. I could take what's in this room and I could start a Fortune 100 company tomorrow. We got enough smart people, but we don't have enough smart people on the same bus in the same direction. And we've got to find a way to put down some of these positions that we have that are counterproductive to what we need to be doing. And the final analysis is about student success. And the final analysis is about helping our students become productive citizens of this country and this world. And the final analysis is about creating a future for our children and our grandchildren, if you're like me. I'll be old, but we've got to simply take the challenge and move forward and stop and not be stuck in the mud. We can resist all the change we want, but the only constant that we have is change. It's going to change whether we want it to or not. I'd certainly like to be a part of that change. I'd like to be creating the change. I don't want the change to happen to me or to you or to our children. So let's step up and make this happen. We can do it. Nobody can do it for us. Nobody will do it for us. We can make this happen, but we got to work together. We got to take some short-term sacrifices, and we will emerge as a better, stronger district. We will lead this state, this region, this country out of this if we decide we want to do that. We can do it. I know we can do it. I wouldn't have come here if I thought. Every mom, why are you going to California in 2011 with all the issues and challenges and whatnot? Why not? What better place to be? But all of you can send an email, can send a text, can call somebody's office, all of us can have those kind of impacts. And wouldn't it be great if we could say, okay, Connie, I know your entering students need this treatment, this intervention, this software, this tutor, you need $6,000 for your student. And Kristen, you need $4,800 for your student. And Craig, you need $1,200 for your student. And we knew all that. That would be great and wonderful. But the fact of the matter is that we don't know that. We don't know what all of our students need. But if we get degree works in place and we're able to do some things, predictive analytics, and we have a better sense of a degree plan and we know what students need, we can then start to apply our resources much more efficiently. And 3 or 4 years down the road, we'll be able to say, this is what the actual cost of education is for our students. This is how much we get funded, and here's where the gap is, and here's what we need to do. So we can then begin to put together departments and support systems and software and whatever we need, resources to facilitate that. But we can't do it the way that we currently operate. And we can't even use the same level of thinking that got us to this point to get us into the future. You know? We got to use a high level of thinking and intellect, and the good news is that we have it. So that's where we got to get. We got to get there quickly. I can't get there. I can't get there. We've got to get there. I need you to get there. We've got to work together, and we can, and we have to, and we will. So don't walk out of here feeling gloom and doom. Walk out of here knowing that you have potentially the answer to get us where we need to be. And when you see those students today and tomorrow and the rest of the semester, look at them with this thought, that this is probably the best place they could be at this time. And the reason that is because of you. And if you do your best every day with whatever resources you have and whatever level of commitment and compassion you have for these students, at the end of the day, we'll be a better place. Our students will be a better place. This will be a better place to live. And this institution will continue to deliver the kind of things that this population needs for generations to come. But the solution is within us. Doesn't really matter how much money we have. What matters is how we use the money. So let's do this, folks. Can we do this? Yes. Can we do this? Yes. Let's do this. Thank you.